Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Overview of Scrutiny Committee meeting. My name is Alan Moeed. I am chair of this committee, the Overview of Scrutiny Committee, and I welcome you all to this meeting. Please note that this meeting is being filmed and it's also being broadcast for residents to follow the proceedings online. This is a hybrid meeting with some members and officers present in person at Dawn Beard House, where we are, and some joining online for safety reasons and also in accordance with the Council's social distancing rules. Please bear in mind that all officers and members joining online that they keep their microphones and cameras switched off during the meeting and only turn them on when they are speaking to present an item, ask a question, or to respond to a question. This is to ensure bandwidth and also to promote as much clarity as possible on the discussions. When turning your camera and microphone on, please state your name and position in the Council for the benefit of our viewers, especially those who are following online at home. So I will begin by asking Overview of Scrutiny committee members and co-opted members who have joined online remotely. And again, this is for the benefit of the viewers, residents who are following this meeting at home. So as I said, I am the chair of this committee, Alan Moeed, Labour Councillor for Null Park.
Good evening, my name is Patsy Connor. I chair the Untitled Scrutiny Committee and I'm vice chair on this committee. Thank you.
relevant procedures. So I formally accept this item as late business in accordance with the relevant paragraph of the OSC procedures. Then we go to item number 4, declaration of interest. I think we do have Councillor White, you've got a declaration of interest.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have a personal and prejudicial interest to declare in relation to reasons 5, the deputation, and item 12.2, which is the scrutiny review on High Road West. The interest is to do with the fact that I was a member of Cabinet when one of the decisions was made regarding the High Road West scheme. So I will be absenting myself from the meeting for those items.
Okay, thank you, Councillor White. Can I just double check that colleagues who've joined from home, I understand that you can now hear us. Councillor Guinness, can you indicate that you can hear us?
Yes, Chair, I can hear you. Apologies,
okay,
I'm having to join at home.
You can probably hear us, but we can't hear you. So only part of the problem has been resolved. So do bear with us. I take it that you could hear us from your nodding, but we cannot hear colleagues who are at home. So it solves part of the problem, and I think we might just be okay to proceed with the meeting as long as, because the next item on the agenda is the deputation. So Councillor White, if you want to excuse yourself, we'll hear the deputation, and colleagues at home will also be able to hear the deputation. However, I must stress that after the deputation is heard, we'll have to fix the problem because colleagues at home will have to have the opportunity to ask questions. I know it's being looked into right now as we speak, but 3 minutes is the length of the invitation. I wonder if it will be resolved within 3 minutes. I hope so. Okay. All right. Councillor Gillespie said that you can hear, so that's good. Thank you for indicating that. But can you say something just to see if we can hear you? Can you speak to your microphone?
Can you hear me, Chair?
No, okay, so it hasn't been sorted yet. I do apologise for that. It's being looked into. So let's go to the deputation because at least everybody can hear what we're saying here. So that's a good thing. First of all, I would like to also welcome Councillor Bob Hare to the meeting. He joined us because of item number 12, which is 12.2, which is the High Road West Scrutiny Review Report that we'll be discussing after the deputation. So Councillor Hare was one of the members of that committee, special committee, that concluded the High Road West Scrutiny Review Report. The deputation comes from Paul Burnham, and Paul, you're accompanied by Mike Hodges. You've got 3 minutes if you'd like to introduce your deputation. I'm going to just switch on the stopwatch. Just bear with me a second. If you're ready, if you can start.
Oh, good evening. I'm Paul Burnham, accompanied by Michael Hodges and Florence Holloway, who will be able to answer the questions. The first thing to say is that the recent planning application shows us just how bad the High Road West scheme would be in 3 different ways. Firstly, the viability assessment shows that the whole scheme is unviable, producing only half the rate of profit that neighbours need. And the assessment takes no account of the Spurs land ownerships either. So there are risks here which have not been properly assessed, not least the risk of the council being played by its own development partners. Secondly, the planning application shows that the council will not be able to meet the promises about a single move for most residents, which were the offer documents which they have then voted on. Out of 500 promised in council homes, 300 of them would not be completed until 2032. And this would not provide enough homes early enough for single move. Most estate residents would be spending years in temporary accommodation off of the estate instead. Thirdly, the next new homes to be built at High Road West, that is net of demolition, would be 70% open market. Most of the affordable housing would be shared ownership, which is unaffordable to local people and less accessible to paying residents. So the development would be using £90 million of GLA housing money to make the locality less affordable for local people, because it will drive up house prices and rents with higher retail costs as well. What a travesty. Moving on to the ballot issues now. We're concerned about the attitude of the council to vulnerable residents. We know that the council targeted vulnerable residents such as Tenant B at Love Lane in the past to be moved off the estate, and this is worrying because of the amount of pressure that the council put on residents during the ballot period. And then there is vote collection. We first heard about it from the residents, and we know that the ballot administration company told the council not to do it, but we believe that they carried on anyway. I'm now going to read a recorded statement from the resident who was visited by 2 officers during the ballot, and the resident said this. They asked me if I vote already. I tell them no, because I didn't make my mind up. I didn't show what I wanted to do because I didn't understand properly. They came inside my home, they explained it to me. I decided to do it right there and then. So they helped me with the votes, you understand, because I used the officer's phone. They go online, they do the thing, I go ahead, and that's how I get my votes. End of the quotation. We believe that such practices are enough to validate a ballot when the result is so close. It is time for an independent review into the conduct of the ballots before any further steps are taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was well within time, spot on, thank you. We are going to take questions, and I just want to make sure that those who join colleagues at home, can they now ask questions? Can we hear them? Maybe we should do a test run. Yvonne, can you speak to your microphone? Let's just see if we can hear you.
I can hear you.
No, it seems to be not. Okay, there is an alternative, and I do apologise. I know the technical team is working very hard to sort this. The alternative suggestion that I have, in order to keep things moving, is to ask you if you want to pop your question into the chat function, and I'll read it out. And I'm desperately hoping that we can resolve this issue. In the meantime, are there any questions from colleagues who are here? Yeah, Councillor Connor.
Hi Paul, thank you to yourself, Florence and Michael, for coming in on such a cold night about such an important issue. I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned the viability. You said that land use is half that it was originally anticipated for land use to make. So could you just expand on that? How's these figures? Oh, sorry, it's a bit feedback on this. So that's my first question. And the second question is, you said about the ballots and asking this to be the decision to be paused until the ballot. You asked for the ballot to be done or an independent review into the whole process. Thank you.
Yeah, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
Yes, the viability is a complex calculation which is done by all developers, and normally the expectation is obviously that they're going to make enough profit. Normally they want 20% profit. On this occasion, lenders are saying they want to achieve 14% profit on this whole scheme. This is the whole scheme, not just the main part, it's the northern part, which people will be aware of as well, the whole scheme. And they're saying that they think it would make them 6.6% profit. However, they are willing to do the development on the basis that perhaps they can do the building a bit cheaper, construction a bit cheaper, and perhaps house prices will go a bit higher. But there is a sensitivity analysis, which I've tweeted the image this morning. We've seen it, and that shows that, you know, if the butterfly flutters its wings somewhere, then the whole thing is going to make a loss. And obviously the danger is they then want to repackage the scheme, but the good things about the scheme disappear, the nasty things appear, like the buildings being closer together, the tower blocks being taller and so on. The council houses supposed to be built in 11 years' time, don't get built, etc. That is the danger. In terms of the way forward, independent review, I think, is the way forward. Let's establish what actually happened, and then we can determine the validity or otherwise of the vote. It's invalid as it's not credible as it stands, I think.
If I may ask a follow-up question, just on that very point, when you say an independent review, can you just clarify who it is that you're intending for the review to be carried out by?
Thank you. This is a question of having somebody who is independent, who is not committed to the council, not committed to the GLA, and not supporter of ours, perhaps, if you like, but somebody who is prepared to independently take evidence. So we have a situation, people will be aware, that landlord and tenant is a power relationship, it's not a relationship of equality. It is a power relationship, especially when 75% of the voters in the ballot are non-secure tenants. We need to give people confidence that we need to hear the evidence and bring out the reality. So it'd be great to have a commitment that that is the kind of thing that ought to happen, and then the arrangements would be discussed, I'm sure.
Sorry to labour the point. Okay. Paul, if I could just ask you further, Civica were the entity that did the ballot. If they did an investigation into these allegations, and including looking into the testimony that you read out tonight, would that be independent, or are you thinking of somebody who's not related to Civica or the council?
Yeah, we've got great doubts about Civica, to be absolutely honest, because Civica used to be part of the Electoral Reform Society, the organisation to make democracy more effective, make voting fairer. It has been floated off and has been taken over by Civica, which is a global outsourcing company that does a lot of work for local authorities. It markets its balloting service to get the result you wanted, not just a fair vote, but the result you wanted. So there are some conflicts there, and I think it needs to be somebody who is separate from Civica as well.
And I assume when you say independent, so obviously also independent of the council, and we are obviously part of the council, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, even though our task is to hold the executive to account. I assume if we did a review, that would not be independent. Is that what you're saying as well?
If this committee initiates a review, that would be most welcome. There's no question about that. That would be most welcome. It is all of these things are mechanisms to get some of the facts out there, some of the facts acknowledged, and stop the GLA pushing the council to go straight into this without asking any questions. Because what's driving this is the GLA. They have a timetable. They told Haringey to get on site by March 2022, and otherwise there'll be no money. I understand that was exactly, more or less exactly what was said, and therefore we have the council going along with something which actually some of those cabinet members, I suspect, don't particularly want to do. We need to give we need to give all those concerned, say, no, you need to stop and examine what's gone on here. As I've said, the planning Lend-Lease being Lend-Lease, hats off to Lend-Lease for honesty. The planning application shows that they're going to rip up this agreement on which the vote took place. That's the kind of thing which we have to stop, and I hope that the borough will want to stop, because this will not go away. This will come back to haunt Haringey as a council unless it is dealt with properly now.
I'm going to bring in other members of the committee, and I'm hoping that co-optees at home can now ask us questions. Yes, I think that is correct. Just before I bring everybody else in, the reason I keep asking this question, to clarify, is because if, as a committee, we were to take on board your deputation, your ask tonight, I just want to be absolutely clear what it is that you're asking. You said that a review by us would be most welcome, but would that be the independent review that you're asking for? Or would you be asking for something in addition to anything that we do?
Something in addition would be, we have to look at what the situation requires. We all know, I think everybody in the room knows, we're dealing with power here, and good intentions. We can all have good intentions. That's not necessarily enough. And I think that it needs to step up to that level of some of the, thank you for your tweet. Chair, you used the term independent inquiry, which is even a higher level. I think that this level of process that is actually being done to people, even though it's described as empowerment and described as all kinds of things, it damn well isn't in reality. And I think we need to stand up against it as a community. And I think that it would be brilliant for Haringey to kick that off. I think that's what the situation requires. I think that's what the borough is capable of, and I hope that that will happen. So I think independent review is what we want to do, and that can be supported by people of goodwill, including this committee, I hope.
I'll bring in Councillor Carlin, and I think, colleagues at home, if you could raise your hand using the hand function on Microsoft Teams. Yvonne, I've got you after Councillor Carlin. Anybody else also wants to ask a question, please indicate by raising your hand. So first we go to Councillor Carlin.
Hi, Paul. I don't want to go into the merits of the actual Lend-Lease scheme, the High Road West scheme, at this point. What I'm asking about is about the ballot and about whether you think a review or another ballot would actually have a different result. And the reason that I ask that is because, as you have noted, 70% of the people who live on High Road West are actually temporary tenants. And they may have been there for a long time. No, sorry, they're not temporary tenants, they're licensees. And although they may have lived there for a long time, legally they're licensees, which means that if the blocks were not demolished, they would be like all the other thousands of temporary tenants that we have in Haringey. And in terms of their own interests, they would be on the waiting list in the same way as everybody else for a house. If the blocks were not demolished, and they weren't going to be demolished, they would then go back presumably into the council's housing stock and be available to everybody to bid on. So everybody else who was ahead of them on the waiting list, who had greater priority. And as councillors, we have the most compelling cases of overcrowding in council accommodation, one-bedroom flats with 4 children, a lot of those in Hornsey. Compelling cases of disabilities and people in properties that aren't lifted, stuck in their properties with children with disabilities, overcrowded, etc. So there will be people who have higher priority than the families who are in High Road West, who may then get those properties, and the people then be moved out, the licensees to others. The question I'm asking is not the merits of the Lend-Lease scheme. I have my own opinions about that, but really whether you think if the licensees in High Road West were actually given those kinds of facts, would it be in their interests to vote against demolition? And would they actually choose to vote against demolition should the ballot be held again? And I appreciate that the evidence that you have collected shows that there certainly appears to have been some practice that was not best practice. But in the end, would that actually have made a difference in the long run? That's what I'm asking. I'm not going into the merits of the scheme. That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay, I think there's several questions there. I mean, on the temporary accommodation tenants, they're tenants and not licensees, as I understand it. But the temporary accommodation tenants are an organised group, and they demanded secure tenancies before the ballot took place, and that was something that the council didn't agree to. But this remains an issue, because the people are promised secure tenancies, but this may happen in 10 years' time. So, so the significance of having, and these are people who live on a council estate, they live in council properties and pay council rents, but they don't have a secure tenancy. So I believe that offering a secure tenancy to those temporary accommodation tenants at Love Lane would be a positive thing that the council ought to do. And I think that, it's not against the council's policies, because the council can make a local allocations policy as it has already done at Love Lane. And the significance of this is that it would shake up the industry, shake up the housing industry that has all the misery which you've described, and which would say that we're actually going to do something about it and fight back against it, councils and residents together.
Yes, very quickly, because we've got colleagues at home.
I think what I'm trying to say really is that as much as I support Taglag Lane and the licensees, and there are licensees, as you've just noted, there aren't secure tenants who are living in High Road West. Effectively, what we're doing is we are actually giving them, by building the number of council homes that we are, what we're saying is that even though we're going to give them priority above other people on the waiting list, we're building enough homes so that those people who are waiting on the waiting list are not going to be adversely affected. If we were to just give them homes, secure tenancies, it would mean that all the other people on the waiting list in the borough, across the borough, would effectively slip down, and it would take much longer for them to get it. Those are because they would be they would go back into the ordinary. They would, if there's a local letting policy, then they would nobody else would be able to get new homes. So that's really
what's your question? Sorry.
Well, my question again goes back to: do you think that, in the interests of the residents of High Road West, is it really in their interest to vote against demolition?
Well, I think it ultimately is for the tenants to decide what's in their own interest in a fairly conducted ballot. And there is a legacy if this ballot hasn't been conducted fairly, and because other ballots may follow either in Haringey or elsewhere in London. And so I think it's really important to investigate what's happened and make clear what is good practice and what is not good practice. But ultimately, the tenants will decide what's in their best interest through a ballot. That's what I'd like to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring in, first of all, Yvonne Denny, then Councillor Magbule Gunes. Perhaps if we could take both questions. Yvonne, if you could go first.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can indeed.
Right.
Please, far away.
I was quite upset actually when I read the report and found that there was so much heartache over this. The balloting, I think from what I'm reading, and you read between the lines as well, I don't think it was fair, and it must have been harrowing for some of those residents, being as that they didn't know what to put down and what not to put down. My second part of my question is, what involvement has there been about people with disabilities being supported? Haringey have introduced a disability action group, and I would like to know whether or not that group has been involved at all to help these tenants with their housing, because I do know from first hand that some tenants, they live in the most appalling accommodation provided for them, and I think this needs to come to the forefront as well, as I think we do need to have an independent inquiry. I think it's the only way forward for these tenants, and I don't care whether they're leaseholders or temporary tenants. They're living in those properties because the council put them in there, so therefore they have a duty of care to them and they should house them as well. Thank you.
Can we also take Councillor Gunes, your question, please? Could you unmute yourself? You're currently muted.
Jeez, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Please fire away.
I do have a very, very sort of quick question. I mean, obviously, our understanding is that 70% of the residents voted for demolition. Therefore, you know, if you have compelling evidence to question that process, then I think there is. So basically, my question to you, Paul and Michael, is that do you have compelling evidence to suggest that the process was not? The process was basically tampered with. It wasn't democratically run, or it wasn't, you know, residents were properly informed to make an informed decision. If you have do you have compelling evidence to suggest that?
We have evidence that suggests that the ballot wasn't run as it should be run. And the reason that we're asking for an independent assessment is to look at that evidence and to gather it. We're not a neutral body. We need someone to come in, take statements, interview, look at the evidence themselves. Someone that's not a vested interest. But there's certainly enough information that we've gathered that suggests that things that you wouldn't want to happen in a ballot have taken place. Indeed, the Housing and Scrutiny Committee on the 4th of November received a written statement from the Assistant Director of Housing and Planning, which said that the ballot had been conducted properly. And then from questioning from the members of that committee, he then had to admit that they had actually handled 4 postal ballots. We believe as more ballots were handled, and this quote that Paul read earlier shows that they did much more than that. They went into people's homes, they persuaded them that voting yes was the best option, and there and then, with their own phone, dialed the voting line and got them to vote. Now, those councillors that are involved in canvassing, if you went to someone's doorstep, persuaded them to vote for your party, got them to get their ballot paper and vote yes there and then in front of you, you'd be arrested. And so although the same legal standard isn't applicable to ballots, I think really this is why the whole process needs to be looked at, because I don't think these procedures were ever envisaged when the Mayor introduced demolition ballots. I think he was thinking it would be done on the same lines of any other ballots. And as I said earlier, this has got a legacy of ballots going forward across the whole of London. And really, It was Tottenham Labour Party that took estate ballots to conference, got it made policy for their party. The mayor adopted it, and really they should be setting the gold standard for how ballots are conducted. And frankly, it's embarrassing that there's even questions arising. Thank you.
I spoke to 4 tenants on Love Lane that had voted yes. All 4 tenants had had their ballots taken away, paper ballots taken away by officers. I also spoke to another tenant who told me that he had had his door knocked 6 times and that he'd looked through the spy hole every time and had decided not to open the door because he was a no voter and didn't want to speak to the officers. He said that they rang his phone 7 times and that he accidentally answered the phone once because he thought it was his friend that had called. And he said that the officers said that they could come round to his house and collect his ballot paper because they could see that he hadn't voted yet. He said to me that he told them no because he didn't trust them to take his ballot away because he knew he was going to vote no, and he didn't feel that it was appropriate to give it to them. There were lots of tenants that I spoke to that had had the doors knocked multiple times by officers. I saw multiple officers knocking doors. I spoke to a blind man who'd had officers come to his house and ask him to remove his ballot paper. He was a no voter. He also said I was not prepared to give them my ballot because I didn't trust that they would take it away and do the right thing with it. I spoke to another young woman who showed me around her flat and told me how much she loved living in it, and explained to me that if she was offered a permanent tenancy on the flat, she would love to take it. She said she didn't really want the buildings to be knocked down, but that she'd voted yes because as a TAG tenant, she had sent in the letter that TAG had sent, and she had got a letter back from the leader of the council, which she showed me, which said basically if you vote for demolition, you will get a flat. She said that the officers had been to her house and they had showed her floor coverings and they had shown her the kind of kitchen that she could choose and the kind of bathroom that she could choose if the property is built. Maybe, as we've seen in the viability assessment, it may not even be built. And these are very vulnerable people. You know, I heard a lot of stories of being in hostels, of people being domestic abuse survivors. I spoke to deaf people, blind people, people who were severely disabled. And a lot of them either didn't know that the ballot was taking place until we knocked on their door. There were lots and lots of language barriers. But the paperwork was only provided in English. We spoke to many families that either spoke Portuguese, Turkish, Kurdish, Bengali, or Somali, and they were not being provided the paperwork in the languages. Another member that was knocking doors ran over a rat while parking her car. The estate is in a shocking condition. It is in a shocking condition. There is no slide in the playground. There are rats running out of every bush. None of the communal bins have lids on them. There are drug users and drug paraphernalia in the stairwells, dirty clothes, used drug items around. There are people sleeping up on, particularly in Charles House, there's endemic social behaviour problems. And there were tenants complaining about incredibly poor maintenance. So lots and lots of tenants living in properties that had severe damp, severe mould. They were severely overcrowded, and they were basically being told that if you vote for this, then you're going to be able to get out of this situation. You know, some of them had health problems due to the damp. Some of them had something called silverfishes living in the damp because it was so bad. And then they're having floor coverings shown to them, and they're having luxury kitchens shown to them when they're living in squalor. Another woman showed me that when she'd been moved into her house with the small children, that there was no floor coverings on any of the floors, and that there were nails poking out of the floors, and that she had to spend several hours going around and smashing all of the nails back into the concrete floors that she'd been of the temporary accommodation that she'd been moved into on a match day with her 4 children.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry, I'm going to have to stop you because we do need to move on to the next item on the agenda. I want to thank you for bringing the deputation. It will be noted what you have asked this evening, which will form part of the minutes, and the fact that you are asking for an independent review to be carried out. So that is definitely noted as your deputation. Obviously, it's not a decision that this committee makes. It's a decision that the executive will have to make, but we will communicate that to them on your behalf. The next item, you may want to stay because we're going to be now discussing the review, High Road West Scrutiny Review Report. Oh, sorry. So one, thank you, Aisha. So we do need to vary the agenda because this is at 12.2 of the agenda. So can I just check with the committee members here that you are happy to vary the agenda so that we take this item now? Agreed, Councillor Carlin, agreed. Okay, thank you. So the item that we're going to take is at 12.2 of the agenda pack, and this item concerns the High Road West Scrutiny Review. We have the report, which was published on a Friday, and let me introduce the scrutiny report that we carried out. So this review on the proposed development of High Road West was established after representations were made to the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel, expressing concerns on behalf of the residents of the Love Lane housing estate and the businesses on the Peacock Industrial Estate, White Hart Lane and High Road West, on Tottenham High Road, whose homes and business premises were due to be demolished as part of this scheme. We started the review at the end of 2019, when I was then the chair of the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel. However, due to the onset of the pandemic, it was pushed back, it was postponed, and then eventually it came back to us again as I became the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and a special committee was formed, which consisted of myself, Councillor Connor, Councillor Carlin, Councillor Gunness, as well as Councillors Bob Hare and Dawn Barnes. So thank you to the special committee members who concluded this scrutiny review. The committee was very clear in its view that the council should be able to demonstrate that regeneration is not simply being done to an area, but is instead being designed in partnership with those who live and work in that area. And future regeneration plans should be drawn up with active input from residents, businesses, and community and voluntary organizations who have a genuine say in the final outcome. My personal view, looking at this regeneration scheme, speaking to some of the businesses and some of those who would be affected by this scheme is probably not a very good example of how regeneration should be done. So we have put forward a number of robust recommendations. And in terms of what we've heard from the deputation this evening, with allegations of interference and impropriety in the way that the state demolition ballot was concluded, unfortunately, these representations, the emails that we received, we had already concluded our evidence gathering sessions, and the committee had not had an opportunity to receive direct evidence on this matter. And in the circumstances, we have recommended that a lessons learned review is undertaken. And finally, I would like to thank those that participated in the review, including local residents associations, local businesses, voluntary and campaigning organisations, council officers, Lend-Lease, and Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. I will take you through the recommendations that we have made. They are set out on pages 4 and 5 of the supplementary report of this agenda. Recommendation number 1 is that rent levels, including any service charges for residents transferring from the Love Lane state to a property in the regeneration scheme or elsewhere, should be at the same level without a diminution in the security of their tenancy. The second recommendation is the one I've just mentioned, that in light of the representations that we've heard and the allegations around the conduct by officers or other parties during the Love Lane state demolition ballot process, but we've not directly received any evidence. And in the circumstances, we have recommended that a lessons learned review is undertaken by the council with particular focus on the experience of residents to inform any similar future ballots. And I want to add at this point that this is the very first state demolition ballot that was conducted in Haringey. So it's particularly important that we do give the due importance that is required to the allegations and to the representations that have been made. Can I come back to you at the end? Yes? And the recommendation number 3, as a principle, resident leaseholders should not be in a much worse financial position if they have to sell their leasehold interest and purchase a new unit in the regeneration scheme. To avoid this, the council should offer a range of financial support measures to resident leaseholders in appropriate circumstances. Recommendation number 4, the council must ensure that adequate new infrastructure, including health and education services, is built into the redevelopment plans. Recommendation number 5, the council should ensure that A, green spaces in the redeveloped areas should be of sufficient size and open to all. They should not be gated and for exclusive use of some tenures of residence. 5B, there should be communal spaces, halls for residents so that they're accessible to all. 5C, cycle parks and parking rights should be the same for all tenures of residents. 5D, construction of new properties in the regeneration scheme is carbon neutral. Recommendation number 6, the new council homes in the redevelopment must be suitable for the full range of needs of disabled people. This should include accessible and adaptable housing as required by the London Plan and ensure that inclusive design principles are built into the construction of the homes that are to be acquired by the council in the wider redevelopment scheme. In relation to the relocation of Grace organisation, at recommendation number 7, we've said that firm assurances should be given by the council as part of the ongoing discussions with the Grace organisation that its relocation should be prioritised within the Tottenham area, close to where the majority of its current clients are located. Now on this, I will bring in Councillor Connor at the end because we have some further points to note in relation to this recommendation. In relation to the business community in the regeneration area, recommendation number 8 is that at the outset of significant regeneration schemes, higher priority and actions need to be given to ensure that those who will be impacted by a regeneration scheme are fully aware of the long-term plans and implications. A full and frank disclosure of council's plans should be set out from the outset, especially if regeneration plans include demolition of residential dwellings, business premises, or buildings occupied by community and voluntary organisations. This should also include tenants that move to the area during the development of the scheme. Number 9, future regeneration plans should be drawn up using co-production principles with active input from residents, businesses, and community and voluntary organisations that live and operate within a proposed regeneration scheme. The council should be able to demonstrate that regeneration is not simply being done to an area, but is instead being designed in partnership with those who live and work in that area. Recommendation number 10, local businesses should not feel pressurized to relocate as a consequence of regeneration. Where there is evidence that relocation would make businesses potentially unviable due to loss of customer base and concerns about loss of freehold rights, the council should use its best endeavours to design its regeneration plans to include a mixture of residential and light industrial units. Recommendation number 11, compensation for businesses should reflect the extent of losses that any business is likely to suffer as a result of relocation, which may include, without limitation, the following: the price of purchasing similar premises, the cost of moving the business, including any rebuilding, redecoration or moving equipment, or repurchasing equipment if hard to move, loss of customer base until re-established in new premises. Recommendation number 12, the council should give equal weight in the new local plan to protecting businesses as it does to achieving additional housing. Principles that underpin the GLA's resident ballot requirement funding condition should apply to businesses. This could be achieved through proactive engagement with businesses, taking into account their concerns and priorities. This recommendation, if I may add, is to acknowledge that residents have state demolition ballot, but businesses don't have anything similar. So we have recommended that the same principles apply to businesses as well. In relation to the socio-economic investment program, recommendation 13, we've said that there should be transparency over how the 10 million worth of funding in the program is allocated, and co-production principles should be applied to allocate the funding based on the principles of the local community. The Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, they've made a number of obtained a number of planning applications. We've recommended that the negotiations between the council, Lend-Lease and Tottenham Hotspur Football Club over the future of phase B of the redevelopment site should take place at the earliest opportunity. And finally, we have a recommendation about industrial space in mixed-use developments, and that is the final recommendation, recommendation number 15. The council should ensure that the new local plan prioritises a mixed economy in the borough with sufficient employment space to support a diverse range of skills and employment opportunities for local residents. If I could bring in Councillor Connor, who will add something to recommendation 7, and that is the relocation of Grace Organisation.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I just wanted to note for the committee for the report that at section 8.18 in the report, the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee is going to continue to monitor the progress of that. That's in relation to number 7 on the recommendations. However, Chair, I just wondered, as an OSC, we can take evidence up to the point we agree these recommendations, and having heard the evidence tonight, I wondered if we're minded to change, instead of the lessons learned review, that we do ask for an independent review into the ballots, because I think it's been highlighted this is supposed to be the gold standard approach. This was the new mayoral instigation of doing this, and I think we need to be above, Haringey needs to be shown to be above, whiter than white is above reproach in this. So that I think from the evidence we've heard from tonight, and especially around the housing and regen panel testimony, I think there is now doubt raised about what's happened, and in that circumstances I'm wondering if we should strengthen these recommendations into the independent review. Thank you.
Okay, I think if I could perhaps get some advice from Assistant Head of Legal Stephen, who's here. The suggestion is that in light of the evidence or the representations we've heard tonight, that we strengthen recommendation number 2 by adding that there is an independent review.
Chair, just to say that with these processes, you hear evidence from all sides. You've had the deputation today, but what you haven't had the benefit of is also hearing from officers involved. I think what is important for the chair the committee to bear in mind is that with the scrutiny review process, you've had evidence from all sides, and that gave rise to your recommendations. The position you're currently in now is that you haven't had that benefit, and for that reason, Chair, I would advise against that.
I think, given that advice, what I would say, Councillor Connor, is without it becoming part of the recommendations of the scrutiny review, we can still make a recommendation of this committee, having heard the deputation, and then that is fed back to the executive. That's what I was suggesting earlier. It has the same impact because ultimately the executive would have to sanction any such independent review, and that clearly we have heard, and that will be our recommendation from this committee.
Thanks, Chair. So just for clarification, although we take these recommendations as our recommendation from the Scrutiny Committee tonight is that we also ask for an independent review into ballots, and that comes from us as an add-on, if you like. Okay, thank you.
It's from this meeting, having heard the deputation. Councillor Hare.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, for the work you did in the last part of the review. And I think, personally, I would like to acknowledge the work of the officer who is involved in all the meetings and the writing up. I've got some smallish points. I don't think they really affect anything that's in the recommendations. I think in the Chair's forward, if I may be so bold as to suggest, I think it would be worth noting that the process of review was long, rather interrupted by the COVID situation, and there were changes in the membership of the panel, and that's why O&S has taken on the completion of the review, and that we couldn't in the end have all the evidence sessions that we might have liked to have conducted. I think something along those lines might be helpful to set in context. It was a long-running review. On recommendation point 2, which is not really part of the report, but it's mentioned, I did receive a copy of the photo I described at the last meeting of the panel, which showed a person carrying a canvas bag marked ballot box, but I didn't circulate it as I said I would, because I established that the person who was carrying in the bag marked ballot box was not a council officer, which was the point in question. And so it wasn't relevant to that particular question, but I do note that it was a capita person who had used a canvas bag in that way. I don't think that's really in dispute, but I thought I would explain. On recommendation 11, the first bullet point should, I think, there is an argument for saying it's not just in quotes, what was quoted in the report, the price of purchasing similar premises, but it should, I think, say the price of purchasing similar premises on similar freehold or leasehold basis as existing, because that is one of the things that we heard from the Peacock Estate representatives, was the thing that mattered a huge amount to them in terms of their ability to run their business long term with security and even hand on the business, as all of them expected to do, to the next generation. Indeed, most of the Peacock businesses themselves are already second generation. I don't think we mentioned that a number of the premises included residential accommodation. This is the premises on the High Road and on White Hart Lane, and that we need to reflect that. It's not just a business premises, but in some cases also the residential premises where the owners of the business and their family live. I think also, again, in this section, I think we should say something like this, and it's my suggestion here, to recognise the high level of difficulties in business planning, investing and financing created by the uncertainties that those businesses have endured, and to engage with the businesses that may be affected fully and this is in a way for the future, fully and at the earliest stage of considering regeneration schemes to limit the additional disruption caused by uncertainties. That is not a particularly good wording, but I hope that that idea can be recognised, because it was another thing that we heard about from the Peacock Estate businesses. On recommendation 13, I think we should be fully costing the value, and that would be economic and social, including indirect, because of the number of businesses that relate to them, Haringey businesses that use those businesses and benefit from them. Therefore, to fully cost the value, economic, social, including direct, of the businesses as part of the public engagement and analysis. Finally, on recommendation 15, I'd just like to say this is excellent and at the core of the concerns that emerged from the review. I've got a final small comment about the actual report itself at 6.4. The effect on the businesses of the change from the original Arup master plan should be described, because option 1 was supported by the businesses because the Peacock Estate was retained in option 1. Therefore, the change was very significant for them, the change in that original Arup master plan to what will now be the Lend-Lease master plan.
So okay, thank you. I think those points we'll note. I think you'll find, Councillor Hare, that some of what you wanted to highlight this evening is also captured in the main body of the report. So your points are given its due attention, especially in relation to what you said about the freehold ownership of the businesses, because it's not a simply case of ensuring that they're able to relocate, but that there isn't any diminution in their status, whether it's freehold or it's leasehold. So that's all in there. So thank you for the additional points that you brought to the meeting. I take it that we don't have any further points. You have, okay, Councillor Connor.
Sorry, this is to legal, so Stephen, this is to yourself. And I'm not sure you can answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So in the deputation tonight, we heard about the viability of the scheme, and the concerning bit, I think, for the panel members will be about the council houses being built last. And the concern is if the viability, if there's only a 6.6% profit across the whole scheme, which we heard tonight, or that was a figure given to us, is there any penalty clause on Lend-Lease if they don't build, if they run out of money and they say, well, there's no profit? What guarantees do we have as a council that those council houses will get built? Have we got a penalty clause in there? And I'm asking this on legal, so I'm sure you might need to go away and think, get some more information. But I think that's really important for us as councillors to understand that bit.
I think, Councillor Connor, you're absolutely right. I'm not familiar with the details of the contract. I can speak to my colleagues about it, and hopefully in due course we'll respond to that point.
Thank you.
Okay. I think given the other items on the agenda, we probably need to bring this item to a close. but we do need to take a vote. Can I just ask the committee members here that you agree to adopt this scrutiny review report? I vote yes. Yes. And Councillor Carlin. Okay, yes. Thank you very much indeed. So this scrutiny review report is agreed, and the next stage is that I will be presenting it to the Cabinet for the Cabinet's agreement, and for the colleagues who brought the deputation. Thank you very much, Paul, Florence and Mike. And as you've heard, we are making a recommendation from this committee that there be an independent review of the estate demolition ballot. Thank you very much indeed. The next item, for which we can invite Councillor Matt White back to the meeting if he can hear us. Okay, brilliant. We're now looking at item 6 on the in the agenda pack, and that's the minutes of the last meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on 7th of October 2021, and you'll find these minutes set out on pages 1 to 8 of the agenda pack. Can I ask if anybody has any matters arising or any questions on these minutes? Yeah, Councillor Connor.
Hi, there's just 2 actions from item 12 and item 13 that I think just need a written report back to the committee. Thank you.
Yeah, my understanding is that these will also be actioned as part of the budget scrutiny process, but yes, noted. So I think we can otherwise agree these minutes. Yeah, okay. Then we move on to item 7. So we have a series of minutes of meetings of other scrutiny panels. So we have those minutes are set out on pages 9 to 50. You've got the minutes of adults and health, children and young people, environment and community safety, housing and regen. Those minutes are for noting purposes. However, I will just ask the respective chairs of the panels if there is anything specific that you want to highlight. You don't need to, but this is your opportunity to do so. Councillor Connor.
Very briefly, Chair, thank you. In the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee, just to note, because this came up at full council, we visited the Irish Centre and were looking at how the Irish group could potentially be working alongside the Grace organisation. So just to note that that's something that's coming through our panel. Thank you.
Excellent. Did you have something to add, Councillor White?
No, nothing to add. I think I updated the committee on this particular meeting that appears in the minutes under the changes to the work plan at our last meeting. So I've got nothing further to add.
Councillor Gunness, you've indicated that you might have something to add. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that children and young people panel would be actually, like we're in process of evidence gathering for child poverty review. So that's going to be, hopefully, it will be ready by March. But the work for the scoping of the work and also evidence gathering session has been scheduled, so it's due to start in December. Just wanted to mention that.
Okay, thank you. So I think with that being said, we note the minutes that are set out on pages 9 to 50 of the agenda pack. Then we move to item number 8. Oh, sorry. Lords. No, that was a legacy hand, perhaps. We do move. No? Okay, sorry. Sorry, we saw it and then it disappeared. Yes, go on.
I want to follow up on what Pippa was saying about the Irish Centre, only for the fact that someone notified me that a paper was going before her committee, her panel, to discuss the move of the Grace Foundation. We wouldn't have known anything. The Irish community would not have known anything. As a result, of course, there was a deputation to full council, but I think it should be noted that if we are so keen on co-production, and we're using the title of the Irish Cultural Centre in that document, I think there should have been some attention given to the Irish community.
Thank you, Lords. And yes, we are. It would be nice actually if you wanted to come in and just listen into the next time we have it at the Adults and Health, and we'll definitely invite you along and others, and I'll have a conversation with you offline about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are now ready to move to the next item, which is item number 8. And on this is at pages 51 to 62 of the agenda pack. And it is joint working with and support for the voluntary and community sector. If I may invite, we have, I believe, Jeffrey Osen, who is chair of Bridge Renewal Trust, and Poppy Thomas, voluntary community sector coordinator, to introduce the slides. Because of shortage of time, I don't know whether it can be done in 5 minutes, and then we can ask you questions. Yeah, so over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, we'll aim for 5 minutes to allow some time for questions. And just to note that Beverly Tarker is here as well. Shall I share my screen to present the slides, or will you be doing that? I've got it ready.
I think you share the screen.
Great, I've got that ready.
Yeah, you share the screen and we can see it here.
Fabulous. Let me just bring that up. Okay. So I will make that full screen, and if you let me know when you can see that. Great. Is that visible?
Yes, we can see that.
Brilliant. Thank you. So myself and Jeffrey are going to share the presentation here, and as I said, we will try and whiz through and leave plenty of time for questions, as I know you can refer back to the slides. So as introduced, this item, Overview and Scrutiny Committee, asks for an update and discussion on how the council works with the local voluntary and community sector, how the council is strengthening their capacity and working with the sector to attract external investment, and on involving and supporting voluntary organisations to bid for services. I think Jeffrey is going to start us off with this slide.
Thank you, Poppy, and thank you, Chair, and everyone for inviting us. Just to correct my title, Chair, I am the Chief Executive of Bridge Renewal Trust and not the Chair. Now, Bridge Renewal Trust, we were commissioned way back in 2016 to work with the council as the strategic partner to make sure that the voluntary and community sector is included and is stronger. And really what it means is developing capacity of the sector. And what I would say, I'm not going to go through everything on the slide, but what I would say is that I think if you look at the council and the voluntary sector, and if you imagine a triangle of co-production, I'm going to call it that, with resident as well, I think having a strong voluntary sector and a strong council working very closely together, and we both work very closely with residents, and we must involve them. And I think if we work together in that triangle of co-production, we are stronger. And part of what the council recognized that we should do is help develop that capacity of the sector, so we can all play our part in that. And that is about funding, but it's also about partnership and coming together. And we're going to enshrine that in the review of the VCS strategy that we're working on. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jeffrey. And so on my next slide, I'm just going to give a little bit of sort of insight into some of the joint work that's been going on, because since summer 2020, there has been a council-based voluntary sector support team, which is the team that I'm part of. We sit within the Connected Communities programme, and we work jointly with Bridge colleagues to kind of grow the voluntary sector support that's available and develop the partnership working between voluntary organisations and with council teams. And so in terms of some of the work that we've done, I won't go through all of this as I know we're pushed for time, but some of the themes that work has centred around have included around kind of funding and direct support, And you know, over 2 million, almost 3 million external funding has been brought into projects serving Haringey during 2020 to 21, and with direct support on funding bids from the voluntary sector support team at over 161,000, joint working with Haringey Giving. The team has also been providing workshops and training, as well as kind of events and meetings. So we're all really building on the work of the Bridge and the voluntary sector strategic partner. That team really works to kind of embed that relationship within the council as well, and build on that work. Jeffrey, I think, is going to take us on a little bit of the next slide, talking about networks and relationships and resources, which is a couple of other themes of the team's work.
I need to unmute, sorry. Thank you, Poppy. I think we all know we need money, and I think, as Poppy said, we've kind of leveraged in the last 5-6 years over £15 million working with the council and to try and bring in new money to the sector. But it's more than money; it's also bringing people together, and that's why we've got those networks you can see there and relationships. So whether it's around the food network, for example, during the pandemic, we through Haringey Giving scheme actually funded almost all of the food banks. But I think what's important is how do they come together and work together and address some of the underlying issues that bring out food poverty. But there are also other networks, as you can see there, you know, whether it's around LGBTQI plus, or indeed different community groups, whether it's Latin American groups, or indeed Somali and Turkish network as well that are being developed. And it's also about celebrating some of this. And hopefully some of you came to our expo event on last Thursday, where we really celebrated that and recognized the fantastic work being done. But resourcing also is not just about money, but also about information. And we do that through bulletin and through our website where people can find information. It's also about space, where to operate, and facilities. And as some of you will know, the council is working with the Community Buildings Network, or the Centre Network, and there is something called a community model list offer, which is under review at the moment as well. So all of this is alongside funding. We need to be able to make sure this sector is resourced to do what it does, and it can do it well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeffrey. And that sort of network and relationships approach, and that sort of thematic approach that's illustrated by that, I think, is really part of the way in which we want to continue and build on working with the sector. So with that really broad range of organisations around the themes where we have those shared priorities, which, as I think we all acknowledge, we really are all kind of moving in the same direction, and we do have those shared priorities. So it's about making sure that we're all on the same page, kind of working together as collaboratively as possible in that kind of co-productive way that Jeffrey's mentioned. I'm going to say, we were asked to say a little bit about COVID support as well, so I will just whiz through this. There was 100k of council funding for a 6-month rent break, and then an additional 500k, so a total of 600 council funded COVID BCS support grants package, which was distributed in 2020. That was 50 Haringey-based organisations which received funding, and that focused on core infrastructure costs, and that was in response to sector feedback on the need for that. It was seen that COVID project funding was available from other sources, external funders, but it didn't cover core costs. So that was the rationale behind that focus, and that was combined with work with council teams administering other COVID grants to ensure that the voluntary sector organisations were really making the most of the available support and accessing everything they were entitled to. Just a couple more slides. We were also asked to talk about working with the voluntary sector to attract external investment, and this is a kind of another key theme within the way in which we want to work going forward as part of the voluntary sector strategy. The Bridge, a strategic partner, has been involved and led several successful external funding bids, and this is also something that colleagues across the council support with applications and project delivery. Some examples there of recently successful NHS charities bid across NCL with over 300,000 for Haringey projects within that, and the My Ends Home Cooked Youth Violence Reduction Programme as well from the violence reduction units. In addition, council distributed over 500k of central government COVID grants to the local voluntary sector, and that was a real focus within that work to build a legacy position for the voluntary sector. So projects which would have an ongoing sustainability, so community protection and community newsroom are 2 examples of that, and a couple of other recent funding bids being Faith New Deal and Changing Places, central government funding that's gone in. And also what's key here, and I think onto the next slide as well, is our work across the system really, so acknowledging the voluntary sector and working with the voluntary sector and aiming, we've mentioned power dynamics earlier in the meeting, aiming to move towards an equal footing of power, but working across systems as well, and a really key part of that is working with health partners across the NCL, CCG, and in their transformation into the ICS. There are a number of cross-cutting strategies to encourage voluntary sector to kind of partner or bid for services across the council. And part of that work is also ensuring involvement of the voluntary sector in co-production. The voluntary sector in Haringey is very willing, and there are some excellent examples of joint working with health partners. The upcoming inequalities bid, we think, looks like it will be a really good example of that, bringing kind of funding in from different sources and enabling the voluntary sector to access that. And one specific example of that in terms of practical work across the council will be a community chest that's being developed with CCG colleagues, and that will distribute funds, including that NHS inequalities funding, to grassroots groups. And there's an intention to develop and roll out this model as a mechanism to distribute other funding sources as well. So that way of kind of bringing in resource and distributing it out to a really broad range of the sector in Haringey, which I think is characterised by some really fantastic grassroots and smaller groups and a range of sizes of groups as well. So some examples there of involving and supporting voluntary organisations to bid for services. And our final slide is really just to kind of summarise and acknowledge, as I mentioned there, our incredibly diverse voluntary sector in Haringey and the brilliant work that's carried out daily within Haringey's communities by the voluntary sector, and that commitment really, which will be brought forward in that voluntary sector strategy, to working together towards these shared priorities. The voluntary sector's reach into communities and that early intervention and prevention opportunities that are therefore kind of presented, and that's all what must be kind of acknowledged and what we want to kind of bring forward with the new voluntary sector strategy, which we've been working on in partnership with the sector to set out that joint approach to work together, and including sort of resourcing financial, community assets and supporting kind. And a final kind of point that the COVID pandemic has had what is likely to be a long-standing impact on the voluntary sector, both nationally, regionally and locally. And now is really the time to build on the fantastic joint working, which I think we really did see great strides with working with the sector during the pandemic, and kind of embed that learning and there's kind of new ways of working and improved and strengthened relationships into the future. Okay, that's the end of our slides. I will stop sharing.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have any questions, committee members or our colleagues who've joined from home? Councillor Connor?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Poppy and Jeffrey, for coming here tonight. And I know you do some really amazing work at Bridge Renewal Trust. The bit there that I didn't get from this report, I understood the money coming in, which is a significant amount of money, the funding, but I wasn't sure from your report where it's going, because I couldn't see. I mean, there's a couple of specific things that you say where you're channeling money through to. The other bit that I which I didn't also get, was the outcomes from these initiatives. And the reason I'm asking that is because there's a huge amount of different initiatives that have, been coming out from pandemic and, and wanting to work better with voluntary sector organisations. But how are we going to know what's worked and what hasn't? Because from the report, I couldn't see, where the money had gone. How actually did it only cost that much? Did they want more money? What were the outcomes from that? Were they measurable? If they were measurable, is it something we could look at refunding again? That's the bit that I was really unclear about. So I was wondering if you could help, or you could point me to another report where you do have that information. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Shall I come back on that now, Chair, or did you want
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. And can I just clarify, Councillor Connor, is that in terms of the COVID response funding that was council funding? Is that what you're referring to there, or is it broader?
Yeah. you mentioned different people. You've got the CCG money coming in. You've also got the council money coming in. You say external 2.7 of external funding. Is that? I'm not sure if that's from Haringey or that's from somebody else. I don't know. And you say 15 million since 2016. Again, I wasn't sure how much of this was council funding and how much was this funding from other bids that you've successfully bid for, because I know they're specifically mentioned a bit further on, but I couldn't work out, to be honest, where that was coming from.
That's fine. Yeah, I think I can clarify that, and I think Jeffrey will come in as well, if that's okay. So the kind of larger amount, the 2.7, is a really kind of broad figure that's about the money that we can kind of quantify that has come into the borough and projects based in the borough from a number of key external funders. So that wouldn't include kind of any council internal funding. I will let Jeffrey say a little bit more on that. But just while I'm speaking before I hand over to Jeffrey, in terms of the council funding that was a COVID support grant, yes, there's been sort of ongoing engagement on the sort of outcome of that initiative, and what we've seen is that it has had an impact in terms of supporting voluntary organisations in the borough who received it to be sustainable. What we've also then seen in the sort of year since then, and the feedback of the kind of joint team from our work with the voluntary sector, is that there has then been a shift in the past year. So we're seeing external funders now move towards, and this is a kind of national trend as well as a sort of regional one, move towards wanting to cover core and infrastructure costs. And that was really what that funding last year was directly responding to, was that was a gap at the time. And so we now have seen that shift, and we've seen organisations in the borough being successful in securing external funding to cover core costs. So I will come to Jeffrey on the 2.7, if that's all right. Jeffrey, is that okay?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Connor. That's a really good question. I think in terms of where the money is going, I think it's going to several organisations and hundreds of groups. Some of it come through partnerships, some of it to individual organizations. But since the pandemic, there's been a real efforts now to try and direct funding towards grassroots organizations who are probably most disproportionately impacted on. And some of these are are not constituted, some of them are. So really, we're trying to make sure that those are best placed to do. And we've seen what the mutuals can do coming together. So a lot of funding now these days are going to what we call grassroots organization. The outcomes is going to vary depending on what it was. I think the COVID funding was really to keep organization afloat at the time, which was based on a survey that we did, asking our VCS organization what were the pressures and what they were facing. Lots of the outcome for the sector, and I think it's a difficult question, but it's also a good question, because for the sector, I think measuring impact is is not straightforward, and many organizations are too small, don't prioritize that, and struggle with that. So one of the things we're looking at now is looking at something called state of the sector to try and do a bit more and see how we can help in terms of that. But it'd be fair to say that most of it is around making our community safer, stronger, and more engaged, and dealing with particular issues. Lots of it now around mental health, for example, and youth violence. So those are very quickly what I would like to add. Thank you.
If I could just come in.
Sorry. Oh, thank you, Beverly.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, so go ahead, Beverly.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to add to what Poppy and Jeffrey has said, and I think Poppy mentioned this in the presentation, but I think it's important to emphasize that increasingly we're looking at themes such as food networks, digital networks, where you get a range of organizations working together. And really, we feel that that's the sort of the sustainable approach going forward to enable us to support grassroots organizations around specific themes. So as we continue to work up the voluntary sector strategy, I think it's important to bear that in mind, that it is really those overarching themes working collaboratively that we think is really the important way forward in terms of our funding deployment. Thanks.
Thank you, Beverly. Sorry, it's a terrible mic. I don't quite know what I can do about that. So I'm just going to ask, is there sorry, I'm sure there's something in an accounts report or something that sort of indicates which which grassroots organisations getting what pots of money, because I think at the end of when you're assessing obviously how this is working, you are obviously going to be going back and trying to work out if that's done what it said on the tin, and if it hasn't, does it need more support? But I don't know how you're going to know that if we haven't got any measurable outcomes or any way of determining if however much money was put in, you know, I think I'm just a little bit stuck here on sort of the finance part. So I'm just going to ask it now, if a more sort of detailed finance part of this report could be made available to OSC, giving us some details around that. And I'm sure you've got it. That's what I'm saying. I think you've probably got those reports, just not with us. So if that's are you able to do that? That'd be really helpful, and we could just see what's actually happening in this part. Thanks.
If that could be sent to us in writing, I think that would be probably better, wouldn't it? Would that be okay?
Sure, yeah,
the
absolutely.
Information that is being sought.
Can I just confirm again, is that the sort of, that's the overall external funding that we're discussing?
So there's two pots, what I've understood. One's from the council and one's from the external funding. So I think, yes, to do those in the two different streams would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we can work on that.
Yeah, Chair.
Councillor Gunness, sorry, you have your hand up. If you don't mind, because we're also going to get some information from them in writing, would it be possible to put your question in writing? Is that okay? I'm just very keen to move on to the next item on the agenda because we're short on time. Are you okay with that, Councillor Gunness?
I had a very, very quick question, Chair.
Okay, then, all right, ask you a quick question.
Yeah, so 2.7 million of external funding, is that a new sort of funding to support voluntary and community sector that Council jointly with Breach kind of secured from external funders? Have I understood that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. In that case, I'll leave it here and I'll send the questions later. Okay, Chair.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Poppy, Jeffrey, and Beverly. We are going to move to the next item on the agenda. You don't need to stick around if you don't want to. So thank you very much indeed. Next item, Councillor Seema Chandwani. Thank you very much for waiting ever so patiently. This is the cabinet member questions bit of the agenda. Councillor Chandwani, welcome to the meeting. You are cabinet member for customer service, welfare, and the public realm. What we ask you is to make a 3-minute introduction, and then we will ask you some questions. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I say that I've been a cabinet member for a few years now, and this is normally the hot seat, but it's absolutely freezing here by the window. So I like your new tactic, if I can say, Chair. For those of you at home, they've left us sitting by an open window in freezing cold temperatures, so I'm not going to forgive you for this. Can I say that my portfolio is quite broad and some of it's already covered by the Environmental and Community Safety Panel. So normally I come to Overview and Scrutiny and talk more about the customer service and welfare part. In terms of the customer service and welfare part, I guess it's good for me to kind of set out a vision. And I guess what we really want to do is make sure that we're able to serve people in a way that they want and in a way that they need, and giving actual support to people in need, and being a council that gives equal attention to all of our thousands of services that we give as a local authority. As a project, it's quite multifaceted, and the best way that I like to describe it is like a department store. So you can have people that will take the stairs, people that will take the escalator, and people that will take the lift. We have to make sure that the staircase is accessible, and we've got to make sure that the escalators work, otherwise the lift is not going to have the capacity to take everybody upstairs. And the people that need the lift are those people in severe need, and therefore we need to make sure that everyone else can get served in a different way. In terms of what it looks like outside, it looks like I've just been given a mumbo jumbo load of different things that don't connect. However, they do connect strategically. If we don't get the automation right, then we don't actually help people who need help. We're kind of servicing a universal service. I guess the few points that I want to make is that customer service looks after 17 services in a council that runs hundreds. So if I am not going to, I'm going to pre-warn you that if you talk to me about residents that you've come across that are unable to get hold of people on the phone and it's for not one of those 17 services, I am going to defer you back to that cabinet member. It doesn't answer the phone for the whole council. And the other thing that I want to say is, we need to think about how complex councils are, and they mean different things to different people. So we have people come to us for school admissions, we have people come to us for planning applications, we have people come to us to report a street light, we also have people come to us to report child protection, and it could be really general and really intense. And how the challenge is how we equally face those things. I guess I want to leave my comments here so I can take more questions. Is for me, it's really important as a cabinet member about logo identity. And one of the things we've been really clear about is when I was a kid and grew up in Haringey, the Haringey Star was a symbol of hope, and it was a symbol of comfort, and it was a symbol of support. And right now our current logo, which I can't actually find any description for, but it's not a star, is different things to different people. And what we can't have is one department saying to a person, you really need help, and we're here to help you, and be smiling, and another one saying, we're going to kill your cat if you don't pay us in 7 days. And so therefore we've got to be really clear about what our brand means to everybody, and what we want as an administration to always have that brand connected to support. The last bit I want to talk about is the support is really important. So yes, we can answer the phones faster. Yes, we can answer the phones with a nicer tone. But if we can't help the people that need help when they're talking to us, we failed. And so actually a lot of the work in the last kind of year, mainly since I've taken over the welfare brief since October, has been to create new support structures. So we've got a local welfare assistance scheme called Haringey Here to Help. It's a one place where everyone can find information. We've got the Haringey Welfare Support Fund, which we called the Haringey Support Fund, which people can come to and get actual financial, physical financial help. And obviously we've got the other things that have been long running in the background, like discretionary housing payment, council tax reduction, but hasn't really been kind of pushed there as at forefront. It was like almost like a trade secret. And actually, how do we push that out? And more recently, 2 weeks ago today, we set up the Debt Partnership Board, which has everybody from the Citizen Advice Bureau, Housing Association, the MP caseworkers, all kind of coming together because our residents are going to really suffer from more kind of austerity and recessions that are coming our way. So, Chair, I'll leave my comments there and take questions. I appreciate it's quite broad, but hopefully I've explained how it all connects and why it kind of needs to be under one person to give that direction.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Do we have any questions? Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Chandwani, and I just wanted to say thanks very much for organising sessions for councillors to go and see how to use the new system for getting parking permits. And that was really, really useful, because when I was out on the street on yesterday, it actually came up. So some of the stuff that I learnt there, because I don't drive myself, and it was really good to learn how to navigate the system. So I thought that it was really good to have this system that you could just go online. You could for the people who have a kind of basic level of IT literacy, it's really useful. It's quite intuitive. It is quite good, but I did note that there were a number of kind of bugs in the system that were actually pointed out to me by officers, and they did come up, and then something else came up as well. It's probably better if I don't go into the details, but just from my experience of IT, these are the kind of things that if you were the coder that was fixing the system, you could probably do it in about an hour. But obviously, how that works kind of connects to what kind of relationship the council has with the people that are providing that system. So I suppose my question is, how fast are we able to fix these bugs with this new system, some of which only they only become apparent once people start using them and they say, well, actually, you know, I tried to do this and, you know, I wasn't able to do it, or, you know, actually what you need is this bit of functionality. So how responsive are we able to be to that kind of thing when we're implementing a new IT solution that's making things easier for our residents?
Thank you. So I guess I want to spend a couple of minutes answering this question because I think it's really important. Firstly, parking is a really good example of how we were paying staff to help people get the most basic of services, and residents needed to take time off to go and queue in a library, in the queue with people that were really desperately in need just to get a visitor permit. It's not okay. So we needed to invest that money in the IT, and it's been a long program to get us to the implementation stage. The second thing I want to say is, while it's a new IT system, we've always had parking permits for as long as I can remember. So we had a good baseline. So I can tell you that if we took how many people should have been applying for their permits in August, September, November, and December, it's given me, unless they all got rid of their cars or they all, you know, moved, that we've got a rough idea. So for example, and I'm making this up just to illustrate the point, in August, we should be expecting 5,000 people to renew their CPZs. That's what we've seen the August before and August before and August before. This new system has shown that those same 5,000 people have either renewed, give or take 100 here or there, and there could be reasons for that. So in terms of measuring that success, it's worked. What we expected was 80% of people to kind of go over, and 20% of people without assistance, so they could have done it at 3 o'clock in the morning, sorted it out themselves, didn't need to phone us, didn't need to speak to us, and 20% of us them still needing some form of assistance. So the limitations of this project were always understood, and the most of the limitations should have come from the fact, and I'll give you an example, my partner won't be able to get a parking permit. He's not registered for council tax. The council tax is in my name. He would have to prove manually to a person that he lives here, etc. So we always knew that 20%. It is frustrating that we are actually at 35% people needing assistance and 65% of people not. And most of them are quite common queries. So one of them is people just don't understand where the login button is, because you've got login for my account here and the login for parking is somewhere else. That's a really quick fix. So now when you go on the website, login for my account, login for parking, that kind of chops down that 35%. We are facing some problems that are beyond our control. So one of them that might have come up is people are frustrated that they can only order 9 visitor permits at a time. We didn't make the system to do that. Our actual policy is you can order 40 at a time. Something's gone wrong with our Civica payment system where it's not accepting double digits. So actually, it's not about going back to Toronto, who's the IT provider. It's working on their side. It's not working on the payment side. That's a really frustrating situation to be in. One of the things that we have to manage this situation is we've got a program board. Because this is 4 services that are managing this. You've got IT, parking, customer service, and comms. That's 4 services, not all in my portfolio and not under the same directorate. So they meet every Friday, and then I meet with them every Monday just to make sure that we go over it. So that particular example is one of my top 5 we've got to cure. There are problems that, for example, I had a resident in West Green who every time he tried to get every time he tried to renew his CPZ, it kept telling him that he was in the St Anne's CPZ. That solved in a couple of days. It just needed rejigging. So I guess in answer to your question, I don't want to come with you with a firm date of saying, yeah, our service level agreement is they can be solved in 5 working days. All of the problems depend on what the problem is and who we need to go to. So that 9 permit thing is actually going to Civica. It's not just affecting us, it's affecting loads of boroughs, and they need to fix it. So my plea to you is, if you've got any problems that are coming through, and I know Councillor Connor has had some put them through, send them to me. The likelihood is they're already on our identification list. Might come up with things we didn't know, but the programme board is meeting every Friday, and then they meet with me every Monday, and that's the place to kind of look at it and put it through. I'd also say that in hindsight, bearing in mind we've done this through COVID, that more work could have been done around sitting down with residents and watching their customer journey, and actually trying to do this remotely lost that for us. If we had people in a room like this, they could have just said, what's a resident qualification? Why would you call it that? And that would have, like, you know, solved that problem. And Pippa has come up with a suggestion that actually the resident qualification should be part of the registration, and not you register and then you've got to do another type of registration, which everyone's kind of like, yeah, of course, that makes sense, and that's something we're working on at the moment. So I hope that helps answer that question. But what I do want to say is, before this system, we had people as a local authority, bearing in mind the austerity, that was sitting in Alex's house stuffing envelopes with scratch cards. That's not how we should be spending our money. And we had people queuing up and taking time of customer service staff that should have been helping people in need just to give them a parking permit. All of that's gone. And as the teething problems smooth out, I think we'll see that it's a successful project in a few months' time.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question to ask about the welfare part of your portfolio. Could you set out what support the council is providing to those residents who've been impacted by the cut to universal credit?
Thank you, Councillor Mead. I know you wanted to ask me this question at full council and we didn't get to it. So I guess I want to say 2 things about this. Firstly, there is a group of people, a large group of people, that didn't even get the £20 a week, let alone get it cut. So those on legacy benefits, and that I hope the High Court judgment that's coming in High Court right now really notices the fact that the majority of them were disabled and didn't even get the £20 a week in the first place. So I think that we need to bear in mind that people had never benefited from that. Secondly, I'd like to make it clear to anyone listening at home that £20 a week wasn't seen as a bonus. If we look at the increases in our welfare spending as a nation, it's actually where it should have been anyway. But year on year, the freezes, the lack of increases, the way that it's been increased meant that the cost of living and people's inflationary rise, £20 a week was just actually putting them where they should have been, and not where they, it wasn't a bonus to anybody. In terms of Haringey, 41,000 people are on universal credit. Each one of them have lost £1,000 each. That's 45 million. We're seeing that figure drop now to 42,000 people on universal credit. The government has come in with a taper that only helps the people that are in work. That's 17,000 people in Haringey. And the taper doesn't replace the £20 a week. The most, according to the Resolution Foundation, that anyone is going to get is an extra £2 or £3 a week. It's not sufficient. And that is just going to go on the fact that prices of bread and eggs. So what are we doing? We've been really, really clear from a long time that the cost of living was going to damage people more than anything else. And our debt strategy that came, the word cost of living is now become such a common term, but actually it was in our debt strategy over a year ago. So one of the things we're doing is we've got the Haringey Support Fund. That's a fund that people can apply for those one-off emergencies. A lot of them, so far since we put it in place on the 1st of April, we've had nearly 800 people apply. Those people have had help with predominantly white goods, so your fridge, your freezer, your cooker, etc. I'm happy to send you statements from people, but I want you to know that there is data that if people have a cooker and they're cooking at home, the amount of savings they have compared to buying food from the outside that's already cooked, already helps them. We are looking at that data at the moment and wondering why people who are young parents are not coming to us, or parents, because we haven't seen a big intake in baby products. Like cots, etc. But those people are also coming to us for fuel support and kind of food support as well, which is kind of more of an emergency rather than a product. We have the council tax reduction scheme. We've had that for a long time. We've improved it during the course of this administration. So 6,000 families, low income with children, are 100% exempt. We've just gone out to consultation to now make it automatic for somebody who is on the right level of universal credit to automatically get exempt. And we've also made sure that we have different changes that kind of help it more accessible. So just to put that into context, just because somebody was eligible for council tax because they were on universal credit, it didn't necessarily mean they got it because they didn't apply for it. And if they didn't apply for it, they didn't get it. And so now what we're doing is we've got that information for DWP. We're automatically applying people to it. The other people that we're helping through that consultation, which will come to Cabinet shortly, and based on what the residents have said in that consultation, is people on 0 hours contracts. The minute somebody was earning a little bit extra, we were charging them extra council tax, so we've put in a buffer limit. We've got the discretionary housing payment. That's a government scheme to help people on housing benefit and universal credit with rent arrears, and we're helping move to a cheaper property. So there's quite a lot of things that we're doing in terms of actually physically giving money to people, but actually what about the support? So one of the things we've got is now a financial inclusion, a financial support team. It's a team of 4 people. I know some of you met them through the briefing, who are actually, rather than us chasing people for their council tax debt, the council tax team are noticing that they're in debt, so referring them to the financial support team, who are actually sitting down with them and said, you should have applied for this, let me help you apply for that, let me help you with this, etc. We've got 2 benefit maximisation officers that are really helping people know what they're eligible for, and put that into context. £16 billion worth of welfare in this country is unclaimed every year. If we've got 40,000 people that are on universal credit, the likelihood is that they should have also got a large chunk of that unspent welfare. So there's a lot of things that we are doing, but we're not just relying on marketing that out. We're working with Policy and Practice, who have a database called LIFT, which stands for the Low Income Family Tracker. And that allows us to see all the income of every single household. So I can tell you from that, I can't get access to it because of GDPR, but the staff are able just to find a road and tell you the income levels of all of those people, and it will cross-match with DWP to tell you what they've applied for and what they haven't got. And actually, we're doing a lot of targeted work with those people that we can find from that database. So I hope that gives a rough idea, but we're more than happy to spend 2 hours with you to go through everything.
No, I think that's more than sufficient. We have 2 further questions. One from Lords, I must go to first, then Councillor Carlin, and then Councillor Connor, I'll bring you in. Lords, over to you.
Seema, when you were before us, you actually did a presentation on digital together. And since then, I've attended numerous groups in the voluntary sector where I've brought this up, and people are really interested. It's just that they need more information. Public Voice was really interested, you know, the Over 50s Forum, all the groups that I've been going to on Send, they're really interested as to how it can work for them, particularly in terms of case management structures. But how can we move this on and move it out into the community for people to actually start maybe getting interested in it?
Thank you, Lords, and thank you as well for your enthusiasm. And the team are still going through some of your suggestions from last time. Digital Together, for those, just to remind people of our presentation last month, is an internal kind of system. So we're looking at our own internal systems, ensuring that people, us as an organisation, use systems that streamline and make sure that we're more effective and more efficient. I guess the next stage to that is how do we do digital together in the community, and that's a really good challenge. And whether that actually comes from the same team or whether it's how we extend it, as we saw from the previous presentation. One of the things that Jeffrey was asked about, how they're collecting their outcome data and how they're measuring impact, and is there a role there for technology, and is it something we should be providing as a council to the voluntary sector, is a really good kind of question. I'm not going to attempt to answer it now because you just planted the seed in my head and I haven't even had a chance to water it yet. Can I make a suggestion that we take this away and we start to kind of look into how our partners can use technology better? And also, let's be fair, some of our partners might be using technology really well, and how can we kind of interface with that, how they collect data and how they use technology. I work in the voluntary sector. We already use Salesforce. We already use QuickBooks, and how does that help us measure and feed back to the council? So that's a really, really important question, but probably one that I'm not prepared for.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take the next two questions together. So first of all, Councillor Carlin, I'm not overly prescriptive in how people ask their questions, but given the shortage of time, if we can get directly to the question, I would appreciate it.
I was just wondering whether your team is also working with our not voluntary, but with the law centres in the area to ensure that our residents, because some of the time they're going to actually need legal advice, and that could also mean that they get financial assistance through that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to address it to sort of wider thought and hopefully plant a seed somewhere. Around CPZs, and you're saying about buying the issues around purchasing CPZs, a lot of residents that I speak to say CPZs raising lots of money, but my street isn't safe. I've got kids crossing here, I've got fast cars. I go to the council, they say it's highways, but highways have no money, so they can't do anything. So residents are saying, hang on, customer services, we want to understand if we're sort of, spending or handing the council money from a resident's perspective, how is it actually making sure, so they understand there's traffic wardens, etc., and the cost. But once you've got over that, they're sort of saying, well, surely this should be generating some income, and that income should be used for streets. And I don't know if it is or not, but if it is there a pot of money? Because every time I ask, and my residents say, look, we're desperate, this is really unsafe, I go to highways and I'm told, no, highways have no money. So what's the joined up thinking? I know this is going out of your remit a little bit, but maybe not actually. And actually, how do we join this up so we can come back to residents with an approach that makes sense, and so they can see some positive impact as well? Thank you.
Thank you. So just to start with Councillor Carlin's question, so we have just launched a part of the debt strategy that went to Cabinet last year was to acknowledge the fact that firstly, debt was a dangerous thing to our borough and our residents. Not poverty, not the food security, but actually debt. Debt is the thing that once it catches you, you're pulled down by quicksand. Everything else is a consequence of debt. If you're in debt, you can't afford food. If you're in debt, you can't heat your house. But actually, debt was the thing that we needed to focus on, which is why the tackling debt strategy was so important, and to have those strong words attached to it. In there, we made it really clear that the behaviour and the trait and the authoritarian culture of the council cannot continue. We cannot have relationships where we fund voluntary sector organisations, where they report up to us, where we're seen as that kind of parent and child. If we're going to do this, everybody on that boat is rowing the same direction and rowing together to get us where we need to get to. And to achieve that was the Debt Partnership Board. The Debt Partnership Board's first meeting happened a fortnight ago. around that table included the Haringey Law Centre, included Haringey CAB, included all of the housing associations, included the MPs, caseworkers, anybody that is working with there. They have to be part of this family, and the house is owned by everybody. It's not the you're coming in to meet the council. I mean, at the moment, I'm chairing it alongside Councillor Des Nevis. I don't know whether that is a sustainable model. I think in a few months' time, maybe it could be a rotating chair. It's got to have equal power. So that's how we're making sure that we work together. We're not competing against each other. We're not working in silos. We're being critical friends to each other. We're ensuring that we do joint funding bids, and we ensure that we're all part of the same family. And sometimes when you have family get-togethers, somebody's going to tell you that your wine is really bad, and that's okay. We need to hear that. But also we need to be one joint up army that's got to protect and build resilience for our residents. So that's how we're working with I don't want to come here. If I came here and said to you, we're working with them because we do a project with them on a Tuesday and we also fund them, I've failed. It's not a strategic way of working. It's the old-fashioned way of working, and it really narrows it. This is about all of us accepting that we're a family and all of us working equally together. Councillor Connor, you've been very naughty because you're bringing in stuff that should be in the Environment and Community Safety panel, but I'll answer it. So I understand for residents, and this is not meaning to be patronising because I'm still trying to learn my way around it, that different things and different types of funding and different types of even funds, whether it's capital revenue, whether it's money that comes from the government, TfL, GLA, etc., they all are funding different things, and that's really hard for a lay resident. It's hard for sometimes a cabinet member to understand all of that and how that also intertwines. So if we weren't to fund the parking IT, would we be able to use the same money to fund road safety? No, it's totally different budgets. So just to answer your question, I don't want to kind of connect the road safety to the parking. I'm going to answer your initial question and then explain why. The parking income is protected by the Road Traffic Act 1974, and it can only be used for infrastructure. And our first tier of priority in our infrastructure is concessionary travel. Most of our parking income, and I'm not going to quote the figure yet because I know it's changed recently because of the money that come in, goes, we're talking about nearly 15 million plus goes on freedom passes. People don't realise that freedom passes are not free. The council is paying for it. So when we look at our parking income, after we've taken away the money for the traffic wardens, after we've taken away for the money for the team that sorts out the fines, there isn't actually anything left. We still haven't got full cost recovery for the concessionary travels. So that's one thing that's in the priority of the I'm not going to not pay people's freedom passes to sort out something else that needs doing. If we made double the amount of parking money, then obviously then the next sort of levels of priority. That said, the Mayor has a Vision Zero. It's meant to be having a zero accident rate in London by 2040. What have we really done about that? Not a lot. We've taken a little bit of lip money from TfL. We've made a little bit of tweaks here. We've done this. We've done little bits here, little bits there. We go to a point where we're actually saying to people, oh, well, unless there's a serious accident here, we're not going to do anything. And the reason we have to do that is that's how TfL have structured the funding. They will only give us money for road safety schemes if there has been a serious accident or a death. Not that someone's come along and saying it's really dangerous here. Actually, not an assessment or an anecdotal view. Actually, how many people have died there, or how many accidents has there been? So if we take Belmont Road in my ward, 17 near-miss accidents on Belmont Road due to speeding is why TfL paid for those speed humps. 17, it could have been 17 people that died, but that's where we've got to get to. I'm not comfortable with that as the cabinet member that's got to be in charge of this. I don't want to tell anybody that their child or their dad died in an accident and here's what you got some speed humps. That's no way of working. We've put in a capital bid for £8 million. I hope the Lib Dems support it when it comes to full council. Obviously, it's for the next MTFS. And what we've got now is consultants going around. When I mean consultants, I mean highway engineers and transport planners that are going around and telling us where all of the accident hotspots are. Every time there is a road traffic accident in this borough, it gets uploaded to the Met database and we get to see where that is. I want our top 20, top 30 kind of accident hotspots to be tackled with this money. It's the biggest investment probably in my lifetime that road safety is going to get, but it's important, and I think that's how we're going to tackle it, using capital from our own sources, not having to jump through hoops all the time, asking TfL for 200 grand here, DFT for 100 grand here, begging this little pot of money here and begging that. This is how much we need to make our borough safer, and that's why we're being brave enough and bold enough to go in there, ask for the £8 million and get this sorted now, and no more excuses to people. So I hope next year, if we both return as councillors and you put in a members' inquiry and saying, I find this junction dangerous, a highways engineer agrees with you and we've got the money to go ahead with it, and let's just do it.
Just for point of clarification, that's really interesting pot of money. So how do we notify them? So I've got a bit where there's lots of school children. It is a really dangerous bit, but I don't think luckily, so far there's been no accidents. So that won't come up as an accident hotspot. So how do we as councillors, highlight a couple of areas in our own wards that we think, oh, this is critical?
So one of the things that I've asked the road safety audit to do is not just work on accident hotspots, but actually work on common sense approaches. So around doctor surgeries, around schools, around places where there is high footfall of people that are vulnerable. And for me, the schools, the hospitals, the health centres, where people kind of are more likely to congregate. Part of the walking and cycling action plan money that we've got is actually, because we're using that from neighbourhood SIL, we don't have to tell TfL that we used it for an accident hotspot. And 5 of those zebra crossings that are now coming online now, including one by Bedford Road in Alexandra Ward to get to Alexandra Palace Station. Not many people died there and not many people got run over there. Actually, it just made sense. How do you get to that entrance? Nobody is. I don't know how many accidents there's been, because it almost didn't matter in the sense that it doesn't make sense. You cannot, if you're on that side, if you're living on that side of the road, safely cross to get into a train station, a mainline train station. So it's also about place shaping, and also about how do we make walking more palatable. And if people only on one side of the tracks can use Ali Pali Station and the others have got to risk their life, that's silly. We don't have to wait for someone to lose their life to make a change. And so they're the sort of things we're looking at now. What makes walking and cycling easier? And that's really helpful that we've got this consultation, that's walking and cycling action plan now, to actually, if residents said, it's not about accidents, it's about actually making a place that's safer for, or more comfortable for people to walk, and not rely on luck that you're not going to get run over, but actually it just makes sense. That's how people are going to use that place.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Chandwani. That concludes your part of the agenda. The next item is item number 10. This is the Complaints Annual Report, which is to be found on pages 63 to 76. I believe we have Mick Tai, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Councillor, he is the Customer Experience Manager. Mick, what I will suggest is that we have the report within the agenda pack. We have seen it, so we're going to go straight to questions. And I would like to kick off with the first question, if I may, That is the table that we have on page 76 of the agenda pack. And this table is about the Ombudsman, complaints to the Ombudsman, the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. And I see that compared to our neighbouring boroughs for this period, Haringey has had the most complaints to the Ombudsman upheld. So I have two questions. First of all, I want to understand, is it because of a failure to address or deal with a complaint before it got escalated to the Ombudsman? Is that the reason? And secondly, what are we actually doing to ensure that we don't have as many cases? We're certainly not top of the league table compared to our local other local authorities in terms of the number of complaints being upheld against us. Those are my two questions to kick off. I will bring in other colleagues afterwards. Over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Chair. I think they're both perfectly valid questions. I arrived in the role after 12 years at Tower Hamlets, and I arrived in the role in August. One of the things that first struck me was that the stage 1 complaints that originally go to service to respond to, and then are sent out direct to the customer, with us, my team, being copied in secretly so that we can close the representation. The stage 1 complaint is the most important part of the complaints process. That's where we can make we can strive to get a resolution in conjunction with working with the customer. I think, to be honest with you, the first thing that struck me was that we're failing at that. People, so I'm getting an echo. Should I turn my mic down a little bit?
No, I think colleagues at home are saying that there is an echo on your microphone.
I've turned my mic down. Is that any better?
Yeah, it's better. Yeah, carry on.
Okay, great. So what we should be doing is we're actually looking at bringing in new software which will enable us, rather than to see a response that's already written, that we can receive a response ahead of the closure period, ahead of the closure time, the response time for the rep, so that we can liaise directly with the service. We can offer a different point of view. Since arriving, we've in place training, which we call back to basics. We identified all the investigating officers that have been responding to complaints throughout the last financial year, and we've invited them to 5 initial training courses and also some mop-up sessions that are currently ongoing at the moment. And when we call that back to basics, what we're looking at is the quality of responses, grammar. Are we actually, you'd be surprised the amount of responses that I've looked at stage 1 that people are escalating because we aren't responding to the complaint. We're using technical jargon. We're not treating people as individual packages with unique needs and unique expectations. It sometimes with departments such as lettings, perhaps benefits, sometimes housing as well, when we're looking at those at stage 2, it's easy to fall into the trap that we're not treating people as individuals. We're looking at the complaint, but we're not looking at the individual next to them. And it's easy to respond in a repetitive way. So the training sessions are one thing that we're finding out. We're encouraging people to use us as an advisory service as well, not just the people that mop up at stage 2 or ombudsman stage. What we're also doing is we're encouraging peer reading between departments, so that stage 1 can be more accurate, it can flow more, we can ensure that it's addressing the crux of the complaint. Secondly, at stage 2, I'm asking my officers to speak with the services more, to pick the phone up to the customer. Sometimes you can see from the report, a lot of the correspondence that we're getting through in a complaints format is written. It's either in email or it's put through the web form. So let's pick up that phone, let's speak to the customer, let's clarify any issues. And you'd be surprised the amount of times that a resolution can be met or made or agreed over the phone. I think sometimes, not necessarily with adults and children, but I think sometimes corporately we should be veering away from a written response 100% of the time. There's so much that can be resolved and agreed to over the phone. I've mentioned training. When I first arrived at Haringey, it was surprising to me that we only liaise monthly with one directorate to discuss trends and discuss upheld complaints. And that was Homes for Haringey. It was the council's ALMO. So now what we're doing is we're going to be reaching out on a monthly basis to all directorates to discuss the amounts of complaints that they're getting, identifying any trends, and looking at policies and procedures whereby people are complaining. I think the days are gone now where we can punch the air just because we've got a high number of complaints that weren't upheld. Not upheld complaints gives us valuable insight into a customer experience, what they're expecting from us, and why we're not meeting that, even though we're not upholding the complaint. When I first arrived at Haringey, Ombudsman correspondence was going into the corporate email inbox, which was a real melting pot of representations from the Ombudsman, the Housing Ombudsman, people making complaints, and also responses coming through from services for us to hold. So what we've done now is we've contacted both Ombudsmen, the Housing Ombudsman and the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. And what we're doing is we're asking them to send all their correspondence, requests for information for them to investigate through to that new inbox so that we can see that the correspondence that are coming through to us is a lot more visual. We're responding to them on time with the information that they need to make an investigation and a decision. So there's lots of things that we're putting in place from the time that I arrived at Haringey that hopefully will be a lot more evident in next year's report.
Thank you. So, Councillor Carlin, you have a question, and then we'll take Councillor Connor afterwards.
Okay, so personally, I do believe that every case that gets to the Ombudsman is a failure on our part, because we should be picking it up within the complaints procedure in advance of that and seeking a resolution. And so I agree that the figures are disappointing. What I would like to ask is, at what level, by stage 2, in terms of the directorates, at what level are the decisions being made? So are they being made by fairly junior members of staff who are dealing with complaints, or are they being escalated up to higher managerial levels, especially if there are service failures, because those should be recorded regardless of whether there is an outcome or not. We may be able to resolve something before it gets to the Ombudsman, but management, and I would just say almost up to director, assistant director level, need to know about service failure so we can put in structural improvements to change that. And I must be honest, I'm a little bit concerned about this email, the new email inbox. Not because I think that it's not a good idea, I think it is, but the fact that it's actually necessary means that the corporate inbox is not being managed properly. So I would like some assurance that, although in terms of Ombudsman responses, we do have an inbox for them, but that we get a grip with the corporate inbox. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take another question from Councillor Connor before I ask you to respond.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple actually. One was around the on page 72 in the public interest report against Haringey Council, where it said that they found evidence that some of your officers were unaware of current law or their own procedures, or had chosen to disregard them. Now, I know you spoke about training, but actually that's really concerning, because I noted earlier on in the report that a lot of the complaints were around staff not responding appropriately at the right time. So I know you said about training, but every time we sort of say this, somebody says, oh, we're going to increase the training. But it's sort of, so how are you actually going to evidence that, you know, this is changing? Because I'm afraid this is an ongoing issue. And the second one I wanted to raise was around sort of when two services, when there's a complaint that involves a couple, it might go over a couple of services, so say housing and social care, and particularly around disabilities maybe, I find it's incredibly difficult to get a good response. And sometimes I've got casework where people have been struggling, and I'm talking about years of struggling to get, and I'm looking at this ombudsman stuff and thinking, I'm not being funny, but why aren't more people escalating to the ombudsman? Because if I'd been in situations where some of my residents had been, and I'm looking at it now thinking, I'm just coming into this and you've been struggling for years. So at what point does somebody trigger that this person still hasn't, this case hasn't been resolved after years of a quite distressing situation? Because that's the bit, you know, it shouldn't be going to the ombudsman, we should be sorting it out. You know, but and the amount that's upheld just shows that. I'm wondering if that's the tip of the iceberg. So there's two questions really. What are we doing as a council to improve that monitoring of when two services are involved, and whether somebody has been a long time in this complaint system and someone senior steps in and says, right, we're just going to sort this out. And the other one was around the public interest report and that training. Thank you.
Yeah, if you could respond to those questions. Just wanted to remind everybody that we are very short on time, so perhaps a brief response would be appropriate. Thank you.
Sure. So I've got 4 questions all in all. Then, Councillor mentioned the level of staff that are investigating at stage 2. So that would be, I've got 6 complaints and information officers that investigate independently. They liaise heavily with the head of service for the team that is being complained about. The second one about the inbox is, that was an interesting question. Officers don't oversee the ombudsman inbox. I do, along with my team manager. I'm really sorry that the Councillor Connor, your 2 questions. Can I just dive into those again? One
was about the public interest reports with where staff had possibly chosen to disregard the procedures in response to that inquiry. And you said about training. So how can we have confidence that this new training is going to improve that part? And the second question was around when 2 services are involved and someone's trying to get a resolution, or, you know, something that may go across housing and disabilities. If someone, it's taken years, at what point is anyone clocking that this is happening and taking so long? And why haven't we got someone in place to address that? And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Elaine might be able to help me out a little bit here in regards. I mean, I wasn't aware of any training that was carried out before I arrived. Certainly in regards to the stage 2s, I'm asking now to see each and every one of those drafts before they go out, so that I can quality check it, link in with the service heads as and when. It is what it is. It's an independent review, or it should be, and it's going to sound really cliched and cheesy, but I'm here to make that happen from now on. In regards to the training element, Elaine, can you jump in?
Yes, so previously there was some very sort of standard training that was run, very ad hoc. It was a sign up if you'd like to come along to some training, and just a bit of an overview of what the various stages were of complaint handling, members' inquiries, freedom of information, but it was quite rudimentary, I think, is the best that we can say. What we have done
this time, as a new approach, is to target everybody who is a responding officer directly. So whether that is head of service, whether that is service managers, or some more junior members of staff who are selected by their service areas to respond in their specialist area. But we have invited every single responding officer to come along to training to really reset and to set the boundaries with them as to what needs to happen and within the certain timelines, but with a real emphasis on the quality of the response. So it's not just about, getting things done on time, because it's not just about responding within 10 days. It's actually responding with an answer and a resolution to that inquiry. So that's what's different about this time, and how we're going to monitor it is actually because Mick, as he said earlier, is going to be doing these monthly meetings with directorates, so that we can flag anything that hits the stage 2. Right, let's see what we can do at stage 2. We need to resolve this now. So I think hopefully, Councillor Connor, that that new intervention that we're introducing will show some really positive outcomes.
I think also to add to that, just very quick, conscious of time. One of the first inquiries I made when I joined the team was, how are we monitoring lessons learned? We weren't. If anyone looks at, and the decisions are on their website, on both the local government and social care website and the Housing Ombudsman website, that they're a very robust organisation. So when they make recommendations, they will give you 3 weeks, 6 weeks to actually evidence that the recommendations that they're making, be that minutes from meetings, staff training, emails, changes in policies and procedures, they want to see those. We aren't doing that. And that's what we need to be doing going forward. So when we link in with the service to say, look, whether we find that it's been upheld or the Ombudsman find that it's been upheld, what are you doing as a service to extinguish the possibility of this happening again? And when we get the answer, that's what we should be asking for, evidence that that's been carried out, as I say, either by minutes, staff training, emails. That's what we should be doing. And if we don't get it, then we should be in it.
Okay, thank you. So I understand, Councillor Chandwani, this is in your portfolio. Since you're here, so we have the benefit of having your input, but only very brief remarks within a minute, if
Chair.
possible, because I'm very conscious of the time.
Okay, can I just say that this conversation is a little bit uncomfortable for me, because I think what we've got here is a team of people that are trying to explain to you how they're improving the processing of complaints. And where we need to be at is, we don't want complaints. And what's happening here is, Pippa's right. I mean, there's 27 people that went to the Ombudsman. All of us collectively can go in our inbox and find cases that will equal more than 27. So the question here is, how do we become a council that is delivering good services to people that don't need to complain in the first place? And we can tweak around the edges, make new mailboxes, etc., but that needs to come as a collective whole council approach, and not just one team who's in charge of processing it. So I feel uncomfortable, because I think the service that is meant to be processing the complaints is being asked about why the complaints are happening in the first place, and it's not their service that's been complained about to the Ombudsman. So I guess one of the things that Overview and Scrutiny might want to ask is go into those 27 complaints and bring those service heads here and ask them what they're doing to make sure that we never end up in those situations again. And it's not just those complaints. We were in court. We have court judgments against us on certain things. So I guess I don't want to keep coming back here every year. I have to come back here every year to answer the same questions and to just tell you how the admin of it is going to improve, but not actually how the services are going to improve. And I asked the new chair, or the current chair of Overview and Scrutiny, to really think about whether there's any benefit of asking the processing team questions about service quality, or actually ask the services that are not meeting the quality of complaints in the first place.
Yeah, no, that's a very valid point, actually. No, we'll take that on board. And I think this is one of those standard items that keep coming back. but perhaps we need to think a bit more creatively because we may not be hitting the nail on the head on this. Andy, I can see that you've put your hand up, but I'm also keen to move on if you don't mind. So I'm going to go to the next item. So thanks to officers and Councillor Chandwani. The next item that we have is item 11, which is an update, and this one is only for noting. So it is set out on pages 77 to 92, and this is a performance update on the borough plan for the period up until quarter two, September 2021. So if you have any questions, I think Aisha is happy for you to email this to her, which she will then pass on to the performance team. Otherwise, we're just noting this item. Then we go to item number 12. In terms of scrutiny reviews, we've already taken 12.2, and we have got 12.1, and I'm going to request Councillor Gunes to briefly introduce this particular report. This was into family of Haringey family of schools. We have the report in the agenda pack, which we will obviously agree, but before that, it's over to you to introduce it very briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is just basically the scrutiny meeting by Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel, Haringey family of schools. What came out of this report is that there are a number of recommendations that this report is making to the council. It basically looked into the relationship between council and the academies, as well as like the governance and our own council run school. So I will go through recommendation one by one, the recommendation that we made in this report.
We probably don't need to go through the recommendations, because obviously this would have gone to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel. So here is just for noting purposes and to agree it formally. So if that's okay with it, we don't need to go through each recommendation. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay with me, Chair. So there are 6 recommendations, and the panel members probably have the time to read and go through. And these recommendations are important because obviously the council need to play a bit more proactive role in terms of like helping helping schools that are particularly underperforming and schools that are academizing. How do we develop good relationship with those schools so that we can influence them? Yeah, I will recommend it for approval. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So can I ask the committee members here present if you agree to adopt this scrutiny report? Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. So this is agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Then we have agenda 13 is the work program, which is set out at pages 129 to 174. So again, that's for noting. Just bear with me a second. Yeah, so we've got so to agree the committee and panel's proposed scrutiny review projects set out appendices B, C, D, and E. So that's to be done, and to note the current work programme for the main committee and scrutiny panels at Appendix A. So it's all set out in the appendices A to E, which are in the agenda pack. Do we have any comments, any questions, or are we happy to accept these appendices, the work plans, and the scrutiny review project set out. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. So I think that's also done. And we have no new items of urgent business, and the future meetings to note: 13th and the 20th of January, budget scrutiny, and the final overview and scrutiny committee meeting of this municipal calendar is 10th of March 2022. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending, participating, and presenting in tonight's overview and scrutiny committee meeting. Until next time, thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Chair.